Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're connecting from. You're welcome to this very special guest lecture brought to you by the Regent Graduate School in collaboration with the Communications Unit at Regent University College of Science and Technology in Accra, Ghana. My name is Benjamin Labi. I'm the head of communications at Regent, and I'm proud to be the moderator for today's session. This guest lecture is part of a special series aimed at bridging the gap between academia and industry. The series offers real world insights on various topics, helping students and professionals navigate the world of work effectively. The topic for today's guest lecture is effective risk management strategies for boards, enhancing governance and resilience in an uncertain world. I'll take that again. Effective risk management strategies for boards, enhancing governance and resilience in an uncertain world. We are truly privileged to have as our speaker for today's guest lecture the Director of Global Compliance and ESG Practices at Vantage Point Risk Consultants, based in Zambia, in the person of Mrs. Mulubwa Ivy Impundushola. Our speaker will speak for 45 minutes, after which there will be a 10-minute question and answer session. So, as a quick reminder to our audience, if you have any questions to ask, do feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, or you can wait till after the presentation to ask your question directly, and our distinguished speaker will attempt answering all your questions on this all-important subject of corporate governance and risk management. So at this juncture, I'll proceed to introduce our speaker by reading her profile. Mulubwa Ivy Impundo Chola is the Director of Global Compliance and ESG Practices at Vantage Point Risk Consultants, where she leads transformative efforts in corporate governance, risk management, and ESG strategies. A distinguished legal professional admitted to the Zambian bar, she's an advocate of the High Court of Zambia. With over 8 years of experience, Mulubwa has helped organizations build resilience by embedding ethical leadership, risk management frameworks, and regulatory compliance practices into their core operations. Mulubwa holds an LLB from the University of Lusaka and an LLM in corporate and commercial law from ZCAS University. She's an expert in George IV governance standards and has advised boards and senior management on best practices for governance, compliance, and dispute resolution. Her work spans sectors, blending corporate governance with sustainability and ensuring businesses are held accountable for their environmental and social impacts. In addition to her work at Vantage Point, Mulubwa is the training manager at Ideal Labor Consultants Limited, where she designs and delivers comprehensive training programs on HR and labor law. She has trained board members, conducted board orientations, and guest lectured at her alma mater, the University of Lusaka. Currently, she's breaking into the international training space, focusing on key issues such as the administration of discipline and workplace compliance. Mulubwa has been recognized for her leadership and commitment to promoting ethical governance and sustainability. She's a passionate advocate for social responsibility, ensuring that businesses not only comply with regulations but also uphold high ethical standards. As a woman of faith and a mother, she leads with empathy, purpose, and a drive to make a meaningful impact on both her community and the broader corporate landscape. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our speaker, Mulubwa Ivy Mpondo Shola.
Wow, thank you very much, Mr. Larbi. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you very much, joiners who have joined the conversation. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you making the time. It's always humbling to hear things about yourself before you get an opportunity to say it for yourself, because most of the time when we hear these things read about ourselves, we are not present. It's at your funeral, isn't it? During your obituaries, when people are talking about all your achievements. But when we have an opportunity like this, it's always wonderful to hear the things that we have done, and we give the glory to God. So, for me, corporate governance is a wonderful topic, and it's something that affects every kind of business. So, it doesn't matter if you are in the private sector or the public sector. Every human being has some ambition at some point to develop a business of their own. And what I love to do the most is to talk about the legal regulations around developing a business in a way that would be effective for that business to remain a going concern. So, for a going concern, what we're talking about is that business not collapsing or falling away. It would be that business remaining something that is sustained no matter what. So, we'll be talking about a successful business. And for a business to be successful, just like human beings, a business operates in an environment. So look at us as ourselves. We operate in an environment, which means we can't just do whatever we want to do. We have to follow the laws that govern that environment in order to keep order and for us to be prosperous in this environment. The same applies to businesses. There is a way that businesses should operate in the environment where they are, or rather in the industry where they are, that should allow them to flourish in that industry. So, the same way, if you decided to do something that was unorthodox, like wear something inappropriate or do something that was not publicly acceptable, your reputation and your legal standing would be brought to question. People would have a lot to say about you, and maybe you may not want to associate with you. And if you do something that is legally not acceptable, then of course law enforcement will be after you and consequences would follow. That's the same way the business environment works. And as we are going to look at international corporate standards of what this is, let's just imagine the world as this huge business environment where companies are expected to flourish in a certain way. And we look at companies as what we call corporate citizens. So for some of you, you may have a legal background and have an understanding, but for the sake of those who don't yet have that understanding, I'm going to say it this way. Companies are legal persons, okay? There's case law to show that a company, though created by a human being, exists in its own right as an individual in the corporate society. The only difference is that it cannot walk and talk like you and I. And what we are going to dive into is the fact that companies do have agents that act on its behalf because it cannot walk or talk. So those agents are called directors. And that is the very beginning of the corporate governance structure that we are going to look at. I want to define corporate governance before we go any further so that you can just have a great understanding of the scope of what we're doing. So remember, we said that companies operate as what we call corporate citizens. So they're part of this business society. And we have also established that they are like individuals, like you and I, except lacking the physical appearance to walk and talk. And so because of that, they have agents, directors who act on behalf of the company. Okay, so far. Now, our topic is effective risk management strategies for boards. So you may be asking yourself, what exactly is a board? Maybe I just joined this call to support a sister or to back up my university. But maybe you can walk away from this having a deeper understanding of words that you've probably heard time and time again. Now, a board is basically what you call the clique of directors. These people who are acting on behalf of the company, when they come together, We call that a board. So the board has the same mandate that each director has, which is to act in the best interest of the company. Because remember, the only reason we have a board of directors or we have directors is because a company can't walk and talk. It's that simple. So it should be acting in the same way that the company would if it could walk and talk. And that means it should act as a good corporate citizen. And the board is set up to be able to fulfill the company's mandate to be a good corporate citizen. That is not only acting in the best interest of the company because that is their duty, but also to make decisions that are going to flourish the company as a going concern, that is, to make it successful for whatever objective it has before it, and also to operate in such a way that it is being considerate in that business environment. Just the same way, one of the offenses you can commit as a human being is you have to be considerate of your peers. I can't just walk out of the street and slap the first person I find. That would not be me being a good citizen. And so companies in the same way have to act in a considerate manner. So as much as many people may be typically bored by companies, my relation to companies as human beings that just don't have hands and legs makes me a little bit more excited about these particular topics. So let's get into what we are talking about today: effective risk management for strategies for boards. Okay, now I'm going to try, and I hope this works. Technology is not my strong suit, law is, but I hope you can follow me slide by slide so we can talk about it. I want to make sure that I break down this topic in such a way that each and every person on the call can have an understanding. At the end of the call, we will have questions and answers, like Mr. Larby said, and I'll be happy to engage with you. But for now, I ask that we just listen and have a conversation around this. So these slides will be a guideline, but I will most definitely not stick to it because, as you can imagine, I love to talk, and this is one of my favorite topics. So this is fun for me. Okay, so we're talking about effective risk management strategies for boards, but more than anything, we're discussing it in this unpredictable environment. So just as we said that a company is indeed acting in this corporate environment, the world at large is still existing. And every day on the news, we see how unpredictable things are. A perfect example is COVID-19, for example. You could never have foreseen it. But that brings me to talk about risk. What exactly is risk, right? Does anybody have an answer, or would anybody want to tell us their perspective of what they feel risk is? Feel free to raise your hand and Mr. Labi will point at you. What do you understand risk to be? I'm not sure if I can see the comments, but if you're too shy to answer what you think risk can be, you can write your comments, and I think I'm able to read from there. I want us to be able to interact. Okay, we've got a hand from Melody. Miss Melody, you can unmute your mic. I'm glad to see you on the call.
Okay, good evening. I would define a risk to be any happening or eventuality that would pose a risk. That would pose a threat to a realization of your objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good and correct answer. You can tell that Miss Melody is an amazing lawyer by how strategic her answer is. And so we're on the right track. So I'll just add that a risk is the possibility that an event or an action will negatively affect or positively affect an organization's ability to achieve its objectives. So risk all starts from having objectives. So we're back at this imaginary company that we have created together. I will call it Labi Enterprises just because Mr. Benjamin is the person I can see most clearly on my screen. So we have created an organization called Labi Enterprises, and Labi Enterprises is dealing in, we don't know yet. It's just been created. So it's new to this corporate society and environment, okay? But we're not creating an organization for no reason whatsoever. We are creating a company as what we call a vehicle to achieve certain objectives. So for example, if you want to, donate money to underprivileged children that have a sport talent, and this is your objective, that is what you want to do, then you would choose a specific vehicle that would allow you to become an NGO. That would be probably a company limited by guarantee. Okay. And the reason why we're not looking to make money, that is not our objective. We're looking to give it to these underprivileged children. Now, Labi Enterprises is not one of those companies. I'm sure Mr. Labi would love to make money. So he comes to you as a law student or his legal advisor, and he says, I need a vehicle to execute this objective that I have. So he names it Labi Enterprises, and his objective is to make money. So maybe Mr. Labi's goal for this company is to have a beard oil. I'll say that because my husband has a beard and I see a beard on Mr. Labi's picture. So we're just being innovative, okay? And he would love to make money from the sales of this beard oil. So what happens is we set up Mr. Labi's organization, and it is now Labi Enterprise Limited. It's a company limited by shares. It is now operating in the business environment. Now, the first thing that comes to mind, other than the excitement of making money, is the hope that we can succeed. However, the whole point of this lecture is to understand that hope is insufficient in the success of a business, especially when you are in an environment like the world where things are unpredictable and anytime anything can happen. So what you want to be able to do is identify what we call a risk. So just like Miss Melody well defined, a risk is this unpredictable, or in fact, maybe it can be predictable sometimes. So it's this uncertainty, okay, that something could happen. Now, it's not completely uncertain. What I would say is every risk is an uncertainty, but not every uncertainty is a risk. I'll say that again. Every risk is an uncertainty, but not every uncertainty is a risk. That's because it is not a risk to the business if it does not affect the objective of the business. I'll say that again. It is not a risk to the business if it does not affect the objective of the business. So remember, the objective of Labi Enterprise Limited is to be able to sell beard oil. So if it's raining outside today, would that be a risk to Labi Enterprise Limited? If not, or if yes, please raise your hand and tell me why. This is a conversation, so I want us to participate. Okay. Why do you think the weather out today wouldn't affect Labi Enterprise Limited? Okay, we have Miss Fuma. You can answer. That's a lovely friend of mine. Go ahead.
Thanks, Noah. I hope I got the question right. The question was whether it would be a risk if whether the weather would be a risk to Labi Enterprises Limited, right?
That's correct.
Okay, it is a risk, whether it's a high or low impact risk. remains to be discussed, but it is a risk because, for example, in the event that it's raining, you may not have a lot of walk-in customers, or where you're supposed to be delivering, you might not be able to deliver as well if it's raining, for example. That's my view. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that answer. We see Fuma as being innovative, okay? And she's already imagined that we've got a store. You know, we need to make Fuma the manager of our Labi Enterprise Limited, okay? But typically, at this stage, when we are just creating this company and we've just realized the objectives of this company, we have not yet set up a store because we probably don't have much capital yet. Okay, we are at the very beginning of understanding this newborn business. Okay, so typically, raining can be a risk. Okay, for example, to a mother who is taking her child to school every day, she's going to have to take it into consideration. Oh, it's raining today. I need an umbrella. I need to have a coat for my child. But for Labi Enterprise Limited, that is just setting up and is just getting started, that's probably not the risk that would come to mind. Why? It's not affecting the objective of the company. Remember, the objective of the company is to manufacture beard oil and sell it. So we would be looking at things like the suppliers of whatever is going to be in the oil, coconut oil, argan oil, all those kind of things. Those would be the risks, the things that directly affect the objective. Because the idea is this: there is a lot of uncertainty, but not every uncertainty is a risk. But every risk is an uncertainty. So as a risk manager, or as a person who is managing risk in the organization, what you want to do is narrow down the risks that would affect the business. Because remember, this is effective risk management strategies for boards, and boards have been given the mandate to act on behalf of the company. I can imagine that boards are very busy and very, occupied with this well-being of this organization, especially if they want it to grow very much, right? The board is going to be busy. So if you're a risk manager and you show up to the board and say, well, I've listed these risks that we are facing. We're going to talk about creating a risk registry soon. But you've listed these risks that you're facing, and one of them says it may or may not rain. The board is probably going to say, nah, not very good. But Fuma was right about something. We do have priorities on risks. What is urgent and what is affecting you? So before we go further, I'm just going to give you my top secrets to being an excellent risk manager. Okay, I know everybody is in different professions and maybe at different levels of in your field, but the law has evolved and it's about being useful to the organization rather than holding a title. So I hope that this conversation can prepare you to be an effective tool for the board. Okay, these are the 6 questions that I ask myself when I am trying to evaluate the risk of any organization, whether it's a small organization with 4 employees or it's a huge organization with thousands of employees. These are just straightforward, and this would be the guideline for the rest of our conversation. Number 1, what am I trying to achieve? This is your objective, okay? What am I trying to achieve? Okay, we are trying to sell beard oil and we're trying to make money. That's our objective. My second question is this: what might affect me? So risks are not just about the negative thing that's going to happen. It might rain, and so we might not be able to sell our wonderful, effective beard oil. That's a negative thing. Risks could also produce good results. So, for example, COVID-19 happens and a lot of people are experiencing negative effects, from these risks that have come. People are not able to come to work, people's finances have gone down, and there's all this talk. But then there's a company like Zoom who this risk has actually allowed them to flourish in a market that was typically ignored. Okay? There also comes delivery services, where this risk has been an opportunity for them to pivot as a business. So, as we unpack, I want you to have the perspective that there are positive effects to risk as well as negative effects. So, like we were saying, in today's fast paced global environment filled with economic disruptions, regulatory changes, technological advancements, and climate risks, we are facing so much unpredictability. But I want you to get this: effective risk management strategies for boards is what is the game changer. Why? The board is in charge of the well-being of the company remaining a going concern. So if the board, which is at the very top of our ladder that we're going to break down together, is making this a priority to manage the risks that we face, then surely the company is set up for success. Let's go into it so we can just have more understanding of what that means and what that looks like. Okay, so we've said our first two things. What am I trying to achieve and what might affect me? I hope you've got a pen and paper somewhere, because eventually these questions should come to 6. Okay, but we want to take it slow. So, what am I trying to achieve? We want to know the objectives of the company. We have no risk if there's no objective to be tied to it. So, even as you're identifying risk, you want to make sure that it's tied to a specific objective of the company. And the company can have multiple objectives. Okay. What might affect me? So, if we have opened Larbi Enterprise Limited, what might affect them is the supply, maybe customers being able to walk into the shop. Now we have a shop since Fuma recommended that we have a shop, and she's part of the board. So we're going to take it that each and every attendant is part of this nice board of directors for Larbi Limited. Okay, you guys are the board members and you are also very qualified. So we're lucky to have you, right? And so what might affect me means we're going to make a list of everything that we completely think may affect this business. So I'll ask that each and every one of you post something that you think would affect our business, whether it means affect its success or its demise. What do you think would affect Larbi Enterprise Limited? You can write something in the chat and we will discuss from there. Now, once you have stated all these things that you think may affect you, including the idea that a pandemic may come out of nowhere, okay, it's going to be very important for you to understand the priority of what these things are. So, for example, if you open a shop, you may have a risk of it catching fire, okay? You may have a risk of theft or your products being stolen. You may have a risk of having a bad manager who, is insulting customers when they walk through the door. You may have a risk of being badly positioned. Okay, your store is behind maybe 3 other stores that are also selling beard oil. You may have a risk of not having advertised. So there's so many things that affect the business. But the idea of risk and everything is this: at the end of the day, you want the company to be a going concern. So you want to mitigate those risks, okay, or understand what those risks are so that you can come up with solutions as to what you're going to do if something bad happens. One of the industries that has boomed from risk mitigation is insurance, right? Insurance is basically the idea that something bad may happen, but we're going to pay a premium to somebody so that in the event that this bad thing happens, we have covered ourselves and are mitigated, okay? So different people in here would be able to tell you what that looks like in their business. So I can imagine that risk goes extremely wide. For Regent University, for example, if a student dies on campus, that's obviously scandalous to them and it's a difficult situation. There's going to have to be risk mitigation. okay, which means they're going to create a safe environment for the students. They're going to have cameras on campus. They're going to be able to, do all these different things to ensure that this risk is unlikely to happen. Okay, so we have Weza who says inflation, prices of raw materials may increase. Yes, that is also a risk. So when we talk about listing these risks and why it is a priority for boards to understand, we're tying it back to the fact that boards have been given the mandate. Now, I had a look at some of our Ghanaian laws and, of course, our Zambian laws as well. But what I want us to focus on in this conversation is international standards that apply to everybody across the board, because I can imagine that we are going to be able to work with businesses that there's a wide range of accepted practices in company law, which is what is very interesting and cool about it. That as long as you're an organization operating in this business environment, the likelihood of you crossing borders in your operations is actually a good thing and not something to frown upon. So we want to look at the widely accepted rules of company law. And the idea is that Ghana and Zambia are actually quite similar because we both have a common law basis, even judging by our gowns as lawyers. So the main thing that we are trying to understand is why is risk management a priority for the board? Again, we've said we're imagining that the board of directors is basically the hands and legs. So no other party in the structure of a company is given the mandate to act as an agent of the company outside of the board of directors. So the board of directors are the only ones recognized by statute, both Ghanaian, Zambian statute, and international standard. We're going to look at the King 4 reports and the ISO 31000, okay? And no other group of people is recognized as the ones who act on behalf of the company as agents of the company, which means every other employee and person who is acting on behalf of the company derives their authority from the authority given to a board of directors to delegate their mandate. So the law and industry best practices recognize that the board of directors are human beings and they can't possibly do everything. The company, if it succeeds and they do their job correctly, should be able to grow outside of themselves. So that's why we have a CEO, we have managers and employees. So you must be thinking, okay, if the board are the only ones given this authority to act on behalf of the company, what does it mean for everybody else? It means that they are strictly deriving their authority to act on behalf of the company from the authority that the board has to delegate. So acts of parliament will give the board of directors, okay, the board has its fiduciary duties. For those who don't know fiduciary duties, these are just the basic common law principle that because of the position that the board of directors has as the agents of the company, the hands and legs of the company, then they should act in the best interest of the company. They should not be, selfish. They have a duty of care towards the company, and they should do all things in pursuit of the company succeeding. And so that's the basic duty. But knowing that the board of directors cannot possibly do all things and is not talented in all areas, and for the company to succeed, the acts of parliament do give these boards of directors the authority to delegate their authority to other parties. So we'll then have at the very top the board of directors. I think we have a pyramid somewhere here. Okay. Like I said, these slides are just a guide, and I just want us to have a conversation around it. Right. So I want you to focus on the pyramid and not yet the content on the side. But at the very top of an organization, we have the board of directors, the ones who are in charge of making decisions for the well-being of the company. And then we have the C-suite. The C-suite will be your chief executive officer. meaning the person who the board has directly delegated the action of making managerial decisions on behalf of the company. The C-suite is going to consist of also the chief financial officer, the person who looks at the finances of the company. And now, most recently, we have a chief risk officer. We also have a chief legal officer. So most of the time, risk can fall under the legal or under, the finance department. But the idea is that there's a delegation going on down this pyramid. The C-suite is also going to have employees, an accounts department, a legal department, a sales department, because eventually what is happening is that they're trickling down that authority given to the board of directors to act in the best interest of the company, they're trickling it down to make the company actually run as a going concern. I hope everybody is following and I haven't lost you there. Okay? Please feel free to post anything that's urgent in the chat box so that we can have a conversation that is just continuing. Okay? So the board is going to be concerned about the risks because in order for this company to be a going concern and to be managed properly, you want to look at what is going to affect the company, right? And then now we are led to our third question. Remember, at the end of this, we should have 6 questions that completely answer everything risk management for us. Our third question is, which of these is important? So now that we've got a long list of everything that could possibly affect the company's well-being, right? We want to prioritize the things that are urgent. So some companies even call these the hot zones, right? The areas that we need to solve this problem now, or we're not able to do any of those. I'm going to tell you one, and I hope that we can get some answers from the attendants on what other areas you think would be a hot zone for risk management. So one of those hot zones would be compliance, legal compliance. And the reason being, if you are not legally compliant with whatever regulations affect that company, then you would be fined by the government, you would have regulators coming after you. Does everybody understand or grasp the connection that we have just made? Legal risk is one of the biggest risks that a company could face. Why? A company acts in the business environment. That business environment, just like human beings, has regulations. There are laws pertaining to that company. It's the same thing for you as a person. Your biggest risk is breaking the law. Otherwise, you're going to go to jail or you're going to be fined or sued or anything like that. And the thing with legal risk is that most of the time it flows into financial risk. The money you're supposed to be using as capital is being used to get you out of trouble, and nobody wants to do that. So if the law says that Larbi Enterprise Limited needs a license to be making this beard oil, the people who are selling it to want to know what's actually inside the beard oil. Okay, so they are going to be specifically looking out. There's going to be a regulator specifically looking out for whether or not Larbi Enterprise Limited, that has opened and is new to the business environment, has complied with this requirement to have a license to create this product. Okay, there's also very many other regulations that will affect the business. Can we try and imagine together what kind of regulations would affect our business? We're sitting in the boardroom and you guys are my board members right now. What other things do you think would affect the business in terms of legal requirements? Yes, Council Fuma, you may go ahead.
Thanks. In terms of one of the regulators, I would say CCPC, who in Zambia can fine you up to 10% of your revenue, which can be quite significant. So that's one of the regulators I would name. The Zambia Revenue Authority as well.
Right.
I think that's what I would name things.
So you're saying that with regards to the risk of not having paid your taxes or not having collected your licenses rightly, correct?
So for ZRA, yes, if you're not compliant with the by paying the correct taxes, and then with CCPC, if you're not compliant, whether it's how you treat your client, if you're not treating your clients fairly, or you are not compliant with any of the other regulations in the Act, you could possibly face the 10% revenue fine.
Thank you very much for that. So since we're a combination of Ghanaian and Zambian members, what we're trying to say is that the business is exposed to a lot of legal risks in terms of competition laws, in terms of tax laws, in terms of employee treatment laws. You know, businesses don't just treat us nicely and give us a Christmas bonus for fun. There are employment codes, there are labor laws attached to the fact that you are employed in the organization. There's human rights laws. Okay, so every business has to cover their legal risk first because it is one of the most delicate angles. So, for example, a business has a rule that when you come in, you have to kneel for your boss and roll on the ground 3 times. You are going to be pursued. You're going to be sued. You're going to have regulators coming after you. Why? This practice is outside of what is acceptable in this business environment where this organization is operating. So you're a newborn business, you have come into the big boys world, and there's certain rules that you need to follow. Okay? So it's going to be the number one thing that a board of directors, the team of people who is in charge of these regulations, is going to be looking at. Okay, so like we said, number 3, what is important of these things? So we said the first one is, what am I trying to achieve? What are the objectives of our business? And we said, you guys are my board members and we have opened a business called Larbi Enterprise Limited. We have an objective to try and manufacture and sell beard oil. Okay, we're going to be so rich. Right. So what may affect me? We have listed down all possible risks, inflation and all those things. And that's where now risk and compliance come to marry. The thing is, you cannot be listing all these things that may possibly affect you and fail to note that, wait, hey, we're going to need a license. We're going to need to be tax compliant. We're going to need ABCD. Those would be part of your risk registry, but just maybe categorized under legal risk. Okay? And then we've said that we're going to go on and ask, which of these is important? What am I making up in my head? Now, when I want you to understand this clearly, what's important can change depending on the business environment. That's why I love that the Regent University asked me to talk about the unpredictability of this environment where we are. So, for example, Benjamin and my other Ghanaian people who have tuned in, my students, in Zambia, we've been facing load shedding. It's been terrible. It's been harsh. It has never happened to this extent before. So you can imagine if it was listed on as a business risk for a salon or for a food manufacturing company, hey, maybe we may not have electricity, and it was listed there, right? And then the environment where the business is operating has completely shifted, and you're getting 3-4 hours of electricity. It means that that risk, which was at the bottom of your heat zone, right, of your risk registry, has now been shot up to the top because the environment has changed. So what I'm trying to say is your risk registry is not something that you write and you abandon. It's something that you constantly monitor. It's something that you constantly analyze to compare it to where you are at in the business environment. So another risk that Larbi Enterprise Limited can face is, say Labi Enterprise Limited is set up in Ghana and it wants to come and operate in Zambia. But God forbid, there's war in Zambia at the time. There's political turmoil. People are questioning who the president is, and there's that kind of argument. That political turmoil would be a risk. Why? It will affect the business, because if people are not in a happy mood and people are not making money, the economy is not functioning correctly, the last thing they're thinking about is probably how their beard is being kept. Okay? So the board of directors that is acting in the best interest of the business is going to take into account everything, the entire business environment. I love to say that risk management is monitoring your place of operation. And when I say place, not the physical place, but everything that surrounds your business. We call that enterprise risk. Enterprise risk looks at everything that affects the business. Now, I want us to look at this international policy called the ISO 31000. Very cool name, right? And what its principles are in risk management. So my favorite thing about being on earth is that eventually we find a way to work together, right? There is a way to work together. You realize these problems are affecting all of us. So let's come together and simplify these problems and make things work for us as a whole. Now, these documents like the ISO 31000 or the King 4 report, you may be wondering, okay, if it's that important, why haven't I heard about it? Because it is not a mandated part of your, it's not a mandated part of your legal regulations. It is basically a recommendation, or what we would call best practices. Okay, so because it is a best practice, it means people who have been in the business, people who have been in that business environment where you are a new boy, they have seen the problems and they have decided to write a manual that could help other people joining this intense business environment. And so they would love to help you, okay, to be able to navigate this environment without making too many mistakes. So it's the same way that the only difference is this. For example, the Companies Act 2019 of Ghana or the Companies Act 2017 of Zambia, the difference is that those are legal regulations, which means you have no choice. As long as you're operating in this business environment, you have to follow the law, or else regulators will pursue you. Regulators will not pursue you for not implementing the ISO 31000. But the people who would pursue you or who would judge you for not implementing these internationally acclaimed standard is the other people operating in the business environment. The reason why these regulations are things that are widely accepted. So I'll give an example of a home, okay? Your parents have certain rules. Be home by 6 p.m., go to school, eat your food. Those are your parents' rules. But anyone who grew up with siblings knows you also have sibling rules. Okay, you have don't take my clothes, don't wear something new, don't steal my lip gloss. You know, you've got those rules that help you live with the people that you operate with in a peaceful manner. Okay, so this is what I want you to look at these international principles as. They are recommendations and they help you operate in a peaceful manner with other business players. So the ISO 31000 provides a universal framework for risk management, encouraging, not encouraging is not enforcing, okay? Encouraging organizations to adopt a structured approach that aligns with their objectives and decision-making processes. Now, other business players can refuse to engage with you if you are not implementing certain standards. Why? It is also a way of them mitigating risk. So they know if I'm an investor and I would love to invest in Labi Enterprise Limited because I've heard that they are making the best African beard oil. I mean, they've got shea butter in there, they've got argan oil, they've got coconut oil, and they have proven that your beard is sure to grow. So I want to invest. But then I look at their company profile and then I'm not really seeing that they are implementing certain standards. I may feel uneasy about my investment. I may feel uncomfortable. I may start questioning, are they really going to be a going concern in the next 5 years, or is this something they're just doing for fun? How are they operating with other business players? So it means in order for other businesses to mitigate their own risk of making a bad investment, they may want to see you implement these international standards. I hope that's clear. And these standards, I would say, are generally very good in helping you have a good risk structure. There's this perception that risk is this very, very difficult topic, a very difficult area, and the people who do it have to have insane attention to detail. And that's probably a little bit true, but it's also very false. It's not all that difficult. In fact, I would say that risk is one of the most natural things that human beings do. We are always risk analyzing. Should I go to this concert? Last time there were fights there. I don't think I want to go. That's already you looking at the risk of being in trouble or being robbed. Even when you're choosing a romantic partner, you say, well, if his shoes are torn and his mom is cussing out at the gate, this is probably not a good idea, right? So you're constantly looking at risk, which is why you have that checklist to say, oh, I want a man that goes to church. I want a man that does this, because if he's fearing the Lord, maybe he will fear to do certain things. Okay, back to the topic. So I think risk is something that comes naturally to us, and I think the ISO 31000 is one of those documents. It's only 5 pages. It's a beautiful document in my opinion, and it shows very clearly just how to go about risk management. So some of the key principles in this document are value creation and protection. They list risk management. They say that risk management should create and protect an organization's value, enhancing decision making and fostering resilience. So when we talk about fostering resilience, we're talking about keeping the company as a going concern no matter the change in the environment of the business. Okay? And then we also are talking about just making sure that a company can function no matter what, and that it has value. So another risk outside of legal risk that comes about is reputational risk. Reputational risk is very important. I'll give an example of Balenciaga. Balenciaga was a great going concern, making a lot of money, very popular, right? And then they put out this bad advert that rubs people the wrong way. And all of a sudden, nobody wants to buy their products or be associated with them. Do you see what's happening there? What we're trying to say is, when a board is taking care of a business, risk is extremely important, and that risk has to be managed by everybody who is delegating, who is receiving this authority, and that through delegation. That means even the marketing department has to be careful with what they put out. That's why marketing goes through legal to see if what they're saying is going to compromise the reputation and the legal standing of the business. Okay, so it's all about making sure that a business can succeed, creating value for the business. Some risks can open up opportunities. Okay, so for example, a risk of not being socially accepted by society because of negatively putting out an advert. That would mean that sales would plummet and the company would be losing revenue, which is bad for everybody. Okay, that is where ESG comes in. So ESG just looks at what is the company doing about its environment. The fact that that's what the E stands for, by the way, in ESG. So what is the company doing about its environment? In that it is operating in a business environment. So that environment, number one, but number two, the environment where the company is collecting its resources to produce this product. So if we've got argan oil and shea butter and everything, we want to take care of the people who are producing this product so that they can continue producing this product. Now, a lot of companies have been accused of what we call greenwashing, which means making themselves look as if they care for the environment, but in actuality, not doing a very good job. at that. So for example, they'll say, oh, we recycle, but then you go to their factory and it's full of plastics everywhere. Who does this really affect? Yes, the environment, but that's where the S comes in. Socially, if people hear that you're greenwashing and you're not doing what you said you would do, there's something about integrity and it being compromised that makes people uncomfortable. So they're not going to want to associate with you anymore, which is probably why most people don't listen to R. Kelly anymore. He was a product. And when he started to be associated with things that were not comfortable, that society was not comfortable with, nobody wanted to associate with his brand. So you see companies go out of their way to make their brands look and seem a certain way, even better if they're implementing. Okay, it becomes a priority. Why? ESG, the G standing for governance practices, which is what is really important to us in this scenario. The board being ethical, the board being doing the right thing and all, allows the company to mitigate certain risks. So mitigate the risk of one, when it comes to E, the environment being taken care of and the product supply not running out. And S, the people who buy their products socially accepting them. And G, the people who run the company being able to do so as a going concern. Okay? So you may be wondering where the shareholders in all of this. Now, that's where the G in ESG comes in. Specifically, when it comes to ESG, the concern about governance is whether the board is acting ethically. Is the board really behaving themselves? Are they taking care of the company the way they say that they should? When they go on these board retreats, are they actually discussing the well-being of the company, or are they just, spending the company's money? There's many case studies to show what this differentiation can look like. But the concern is that the company is not being brought in disrepute, and that the company is actually, being managed in such a way that it can continue. So due to time, I'll just rush through integration of governance, of course, integrating risk into how the company is being managed. So we're trying to say that risk should be a priority for any board of directors. That now, I love that the law sets up to be able to say, okay, not only the law, but even these recommendations will see the same thing occur in the King 4 reports. And hopefully after the lecture, I'll share with Mr. Benjamin, and he can share with everybody who is in attendance the ISO 31000 and the King 4 reports. But the reason why is because each of these recommend that a board should be able to have a risk management committee under it. So people on the board, so say there's 21 of us on this board, would divide ourselves depending on our interests to say, okay, you guys should be looking at the risk of the company. Every person on the board should have their thumb on the pulse of how the company is operating. I would say there are three key things, or the holy grail of board management. Three things that no matter what a company has to do and the board should do in order for it to be successful, or for it to know that it's managing its responsibility. Number one, strategy. A board has to be strategic. It has to have direction for where the company is going and how the company is behaving. Number two, talent. It needs to have talented people who will be able to execute its mandate. It cannot be so careless as to delegate to people who would mess up, because they will be held responsible. Remember, the Act of Parliament only gives the mandate to act on behalf of the company to the board. So if the CEO is embezzling funds, the board will be liable as well. Okay? And number three is risk. So risk is right up there with strategy, talent, and risk, because you cannot operate an organization based on the hope that it will do well. You have to take measures, okay, to make sure that the company is actually going to do well, and continuously improving on this risk, going back, looking, seeing new insights. So remember, we said question number one, what am I trying to achieve? Number two, what might affect me? Number three, Which of these is important? Number 4, what should we do about it? We've discovered that these are the important things. We need to do something about it. So we go to the talent and the strategy. We're going to hire legal counsel or compliance counsel that's going to just focus on our legal compliance. We're going to hire a brand strategist that's going to focus on our reputation. We're going to hire an ESG specialist that's going to make sure we're giving back to the community, we're executing our corporate social responsibility. Now, I love to advocate for corporate social responsibility because it simply means giving back to the community in which you operate. Okay. And it's not legally mandated, but again, it's recommended and it makes you look good. So I always advise the boards that I work with to implement corporate social responsibility. They argue because they don't want to spend their money, but strategically speaking, as a risk manager who wants to be able to cover this as a risk, but sell it to the board to do it, even if you know from your perspective that it's the right thing to do, is to show them how corporate social responsibility can be used as a marketing tool to bring in revenue. So, for example, you'll see MTN and Airtel sponsor things like talent shows or football things. They are widely marketing their product while doing this. And so they're giving back to the community, they're achieving their ESG objective, they're achieving their risk management, mitigating the risk of society not accepting them, or of the environment being dilapidated, or of their governance being put to question, but they're also streaming in revenue by advertising a product. Oh, this is all made green, this is made from recycled products and all. So our fifth question, and then I'm going to end our conversation. Our fifth would be, now that we've done something about it, did it work? So you will come up with strategy to mitigate the risk that you identify. For example, if we identify a risk of the shop catching fire, we would, put in fire extinguishers or insure it. If we have a risk of being fined by ZRA or whichever other regulators Council Fuma mentioned for us, we would just, be compliant. Okay, so we would go back to see, did these strategies that we put in place to cover these risks, did they work? Okay, and if they didn't work, we would be making adjustments and seeing what else can work. We would be coming back to the drawing board. Okay, and last but not the least, has anything changed? These are your 6 questions to mitigate risk and to have effective board management. I think I've pretty much summarized most of what I'm trying to say, and this will be shared, but I'd love to open it up for questions. Okay, so we've talked about establishing a risk committee, right? So within the board, since this mandate belongs to the board, what would you be able to do to mitigate, or practical strategies? You'd have a risk committee, you'd promote a risk-aware culture, meaning everybody in the organization would know through policy, through training, okay, that we don't do certain things, we don't say certain things, we don't write certain things on social media because we are mitigating the risk of reputational damage or the risk of legal implications. And also you'd have it as part of your company culture, promoting risk awareness. And then, of course, integrating ESG considerations like we have talked about, emphasized in both King 4 and ISO 3000. And then we would have scenario analysis and stress testing. So it means if you're the risk management manager, you need to be innovative. You need to imagine everything bad or good that could happen to the company and test it out, see how bad things could get, or at least be able to do so in theory, so that you can have an effective way to mitigate this risk. And of course, lastly, continuous improvement. So that's our lesson for today. And Benjamin, I hand over to you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope we can interact with the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mulubwa. That was a very insightful, very thought-provoking presentation. You're very articulate, and you said a number of things that really stuck with me. One of the things that you said was that every risk is an uncertainty, but not every uncertainty is a risk, which I found to be very profound. And I loved what you said about the fact that we're all risk analyzers, constantly accessing risks in daily life. And so that means risk management is not a preserve for only specialists, as you alluded to. And everyone engages in risk management in their day to day lives. So I'd like to thank you so much for that very insightful, very enriching presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, we would proceed to the question and answer session. So, as a quick reminder, if you have any questions, do feel free to drop your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand virtually and you'll be given the opportunity to ask your question.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I look forward to the questions and interactions.
Okay, so you made reference to the fact that boards are supposed to act on behalf of organizations and on the best in the best interest. Sorry. So, what do you do as a stakeholder if a board member or a board doesn't seem to be acting in the best interest of a said organization? What options are available in such a situation?
That's a very, very, very good question. And I was hoping somebody would ask me what happens to the shareholders. So shareholders would be the people who can hold the board accountable. But remember, only the boards have the mandate by law to act on behalf of the company. That means that even if the shareholders are beneficial owners and may even have been the proprietors of the company, they cannot have any authority. They do not have any authority to walk into the company and start acting on behalf of the company or publicly questioning the board members. Of course, the board has the mandate to give them a report to show that they are in fact acting in the best interest of the company. That's why we'll have a yearly report from the board of directors that is most of the time even publicly publicized on the websites for most of these big organizations, because there are other stakeholders, creditors, etc., who may have interest in the well-being of the company. There's only one solution, and it's called a derivative action. A derivative action is set up to allow the shareholders to sue the company, or rather to sue the directors of the company if they are acting negligently. That's all. Only if they are acting negligently. That means the lawsuit only has one basis, and that basis is the board of directors is not acting in the best interest of the company, or they're acting negligently. And for as long as the board can show we are doing our very best, we are acting in the best interest of the company, we analyze the risk, we put together strategy, we hired the best talent, it's just not our fault that the business is not flourishing. If they can show that and they can prove that, then the shareholders would have no further action to pursue. But that has to be intricately questioned, which is why we take down meeting minutes for boards, okay? We will have what is in place called the company secretary. A company secretary, usually a lawyer or accountant. I recommend it being a lawyer, because this is supposed to be somebody who reminds the board of directors of the mandate that is on them. So the company secretary would be holding the board compliant. They would be saying, according to the law, you have a duty to act in the best interest of the company. According to the law, you have a duty to act to do the right thing towards the company, or to analyze the risk management of the board of directors. So I did go through some provisions of the Ghanaian Companies Act of 2019. And so it shows you in section 211, it details the director's duties to avoid conflict of interest, highlighting the need for risk oversight and to ensure that personal interests do not compromise corporate integrity. So even when you look at these other sections, as we discussed, you'll be able to see that the act actually does show, and it's the same for our Zambian Act of Parliament, which also shows in section 107 that one must act in the best interest of the company, or rather disclose interest, right? So what we're trying to say is that the law already takes the first step to protect you from the board of directors taking advantage of this role that they have as agents of the company. But it's only the shareholders who can bring up an action, and it's called a derivative action, and it's only if there is negligence on behalf of, there's allegedly negligence on behalf of the board. Other people would be suing the company as an organization rather than the board of directors as individuals or as a sitting board. So yes, that's the solution. So a company being a legal entity, if you as an outsider had a problem with how the directors are behaving, you'd be suing the company directly. The board can only be sued by the shareholders under derivative action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. As a follow-up question, I came across this very startling statistic that in Africa, about just 30% of family businesses transition to the next generation. And I'd want to know, from your extensive experience in corporate governance, training, and consulting, what is the best way to undergo succession planning and leadership transitions?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. And it's actually, we see it as a cultural thing. In a lot of situations, we see certain cultures do promote that Passover. Now, when you look at it strictly or legally, the shareholders do have shares that they can pass over. And most of the time, when you're a shareholder, you want to also act as a director because you want to be involved in the progression of the company as a going concern. And it's really up to the individuals who bring out that company, like the individuals that have created this company, the beneficial owners of the company. And when I speak of beneficial owners, I'm talking about the people who are pulling the strings behind the scenes, okay? What they decide for the company, they can have an agreement that, listen, if somebody dies, first of all, naturally, if somebody dies, say I pass away, not now, God forbid, but if I pass away, my shares would be passed down to my estate, and whoever I have written in my will to benefit from those shares in my estate, because shares are an asset. Okay, just like a house and a car, shares an asset, so you can pass them down, and it would be up to myself and the other existing shareholders to decide whether the directorship is is appointed in a certain way. So the act doesn't go in to actually force you to appoint directors in a certain way. It will just tell you that, directors are appointed by the shareholders at the annual general meeting, but the shareholders can have an internal agreement amongst themselves to say, our sons are the ones who will be taking over. It's up to them to do that. It's not something that we can force down anybody's throat in terms of succession and how businesses go, because in some instances the children are not even interested in running those businesses. So as much as culturally speaking it would be wonderful to pass on businesses and see generations benefit, we see that with the most successful companies like Toyota and Ford and all those things, and it would be amazing to see that. But it depends on the strategy that they come up with, with their legal counsel and what they want to achieve and whether they are willing parties. You can't also tie down somebody to benefit because their father had the business. So it's something that I hope we can work towards. It's more of a personal decision than a legal requirement, I'd say.
Interesting. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen,
yes,
have any questions bordering on Mulubo's presentation or the topic for today, don't hesitate to drop your question in the chat box, and you'll be given an opportunity to ask your question. It seems your presentation was very precise, very crystal clear.
Indeed. I'm grateful to everybody for joining. Benjamin, thank you so much. Thank you to the Regent University for having me. Um, I'm so excited to be able to share this knowledge and information. There's a lot to unpack about risk management, and just like you said, honestly, every risk is an uncertainty, and not every uncertainty is a risk. I think that for me is my takeaway. I'll just lastly go through our 6 questions for achieving risk management in any organization. What am I trying to achieve? What might affect me? Which of these is most important? What should we do about it? Did it work? What has changed? Those are our 6 questions for risk management. And lastly, I'd love to say to my Ghanaian counterparts, Medase, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Mulubwa, for the very insightful, very revelatory presentation, and very timely, I must say. And it's been a very insightful discussion. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and this is where we'll draw the curtains to this very insightful and exciting guest lecture. So thank you once again, Mulubwa, for taking time off your very hectic schedule to share all these insights and expertise that you've gleaned from your several years of experience in corporate governance and risk management, and as a seasoned lawyer. I've seen there are a number of law students on the call, and I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind, one last question. Um, I hope that's okay with you. Just a quick last question.
That's perfectly fine. Please go ahead.
All right. So, what advice would you give to aspiring lawyers who are looking to build a successful career in law, especially female um, aspiring lawyers?
Wow, thank you very much for that question. I would say 3 things. Number 1, have a relationship with God. It's everything. There is nowhere, in my opinion, that you can go if you don't have the guidance and alignment of your Creator. We each have our own journeys, and though we may go to the same law schools or, take in the same information, your understanding and interpretation depends on what God has placed within you. So that's very important. Number 2 is be vigilant in your studies. It doesn't stop, it doesn't end. And that shouldn't be a bad thing or a punishment. The best people are always learning. Even as I put together this lecture, I was learning something new about this area that I find so fascinating. Number 3 would be yourself and be kind. Be yourself and be kind, because you never know who's watching and who's listening. I met Benjamin when I was a very young girl in university, but even in university, I was opening up myself to opportunities. And by the grace of God, the University of Lusaka had sent me to participate in AYGC's program, where I met Benjamin Larbi, and he had come to Lusaka, and he has since followed my career progress from the time I was in second year of university to now, many years later, when I am a risk management strategist and director of global compliance for Vantage Point Risk Consultants. So every place you go is a networking opportunity, and I would love to think that I was kind enough to him for us to stay in touch, and opportunities like this to open. So again, I'm so grateful, and I wish you all the best. I hope that you each will be better than me in the future. God, kindness, vigilance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mulubwa Chola, Director of Global Compliance and ESG Practices at Vantage Point Risk Consultants. It's been a phenomenal evening, very insightful session, and I must say very value-packed. And would like to thank you so much on behalf of the Regent community, the faculty, the communications unit, and the graduate school. Would like to thank you for taking time off your schedule to connect with us from all the way in Zambia, and for pouring out and not holding back your wealth of expertise and experience with us. We thank you so much, and we don't take for granted at all. And I got this when I traveled to Zambia. I hope I pronounce it well. Zikomo. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very insightful and informative lecture. I believe we've all been armed with tools to become effective risk managers and provide value to the organizations and bodies that we find ourselves in. And once again, this guest lecture has been brought to you by the Graduate School at Regent University College of Science and Technology in collaboration with the Communications Unit. And for details about subsequent webinars and events, do feel free to connect with Regent on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Regent Ghana, on Instagram at Regent Gram. So thank you all so much for connecting and helping make this session an engaging one. My name is Ben Labi, and I wish you an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you.